I appreciate you carving the time out and kind of getting together for an old pal. And like I said, yeah, like I said before, the kind of the catalyst. I saw some of the video stuff you're posting online, and we've kept in touch over the last year a little bit. And you're always doing so much cool stuff, and you've been doing a lot of stuff remotely as well with teaching. So you and I kind of bonded over that, and I picked your brain a little bit about that when I started doing some of the virtual coaching through the studio last year when everything went to shite, as you guys would say, with with this pandemic that we're still in, but kind of hopefully coming out the other side sooner rather than later. But
Yeah,
so this was a perfect opportunity because you have a new record coming out next month, and you're also someone, you and honestly all the lads over there, we always love coming to Ireland anyway. So any chance I get to pop back on and see some friends, I just have to take it. So I figured this would be a cool thing specifically to talk about this track and this song, Shannon Bridge, and how you put it together, what that experience is like for you as a gentleman that's probably doing a lot of this stuff out of your home, or and just like everybody else has been this last year, which is a rolling theme that I don't think is going to stop being the trend anytime soon. So thought we might kind of dive in and talk about the song. Why don't you, I'd love for you to start out to tell me just where the song from an inspirational standpoint kind of came from. I know we were just joking about there being a ton of bridges over there, and you know, heading ever closer to a anthology of songs about every bridge in your great country, of which I'm sure there are many that have very rich histories, but this one specifically is Shannon Bridge. So tell me about where the idea came from, because this is a topic actually that we started covering with the first episode of the podcast, that by the time anybody has seen the light of day, I hope will soon be out, called The Record Process. And I guess that process, for the most part, starts out with an idea, right? Or an inspiration for a song. In this case, tell us about that, Marty, and where that came from.
yeah, of course. And first of all, thanks so much for having me to do this. It's great to catch up. Yeah, it's wild. Like the last time we've been chatting throughout the year online and everything. The last time I actually properly sat down to have a proper chat on the internet was like probably like almost this year to the day. I would imagine it was like right at the start of the pandemic, and it was it's actually mad to look back to when we were chatting last, and it was actually the last time I spoke to Matt Brash was similar, and so much kind of uncertainty, and from my perspective, like very stressful and worried. But we did kind of like meet and talk about, there's definitely opportunity for innovation here, and that, if you don't, you're going to get totally left behind. And I suppose that maybe ties in with this album a little bit. It's a concept I had definitely pre the pandemic, and I'm glad that it's not like this is a lockdown album, because that's going to be the most fucking jaded story we're going to hear. No disrespect to that, but it's just like it's what we've lived, so it's going to be everyone's story. So luckily the concept of this was before all of this, but kind of the whole approach to it was certainly shaped by it. So the album, there's a walk in the city centre in Limerick called the Three Bridges Walk, and it's something that I would do every other day regardless, but like since the pandemic, in the throes of dismay, I've been doing it like multiple times every day pretty much. And
So important.
yeah,
So
it's
important for
like,
the sanity.
and especially here, like everything is still closed even though we're a year in. Like no restaurants, no bars, no retail, no nothing. We're not meant to go 5 kilometers beyond their house, so like that walk is like literally the only thing I have pretty much. And it's fascinating because it really takes in a lot of the kind of, it's beautiful first and foremost because it's around the river in Limerick city centre, and it takes in a few very like historical spots, but also some very new places. Limerick is very much a changing city at the moment. Like it used to have a really bad reputation, and now all of a sudden it's the cool place in the country, which I feel like you could probably draw parallels with Philly in that regard, to a certain degree. And
Absolutely.
I started listening to, I would just pick an album and listen to it from start to finish on that walk, and kind of started to notice, most albums are like between a half an hour and 35 to maybe 40 minutes. And it was taking me roughly that same length of time to do the walk. So the penny dropped that I could write an album for this walk where each song is a specific section of the walk and it's timed to it, so that the first song would be Shannon Bridge, which is where the walk starts, and it would take you the length of time it takes to walk across Shannon Bridge. So each song is picked apart like that, and I walked it hundreds of times, timing myself, and watched other people as well, and timed other people in a very weird stalkerish way. And whatever, I think Shannon Bridge is like 3.5 minutes long. So before I had written the song, I knew this was going to be the album opener. It's going to be this long. The bridge itself, like this is going like a real history lesson before my time. It used to be called the Windy Bridge or the Whistling Bridge, because the way it's actually built, it was built in the early 80s, I believe, and not constructed very well. And it's just like the wind howls past it. It is noisy as fuck, and it still is, but it used to like be letting out a screech the way the sides of it are made. And it faces, one side of it faces into Limerick City, and you can see the castle and you can see the old boat club, but then you can also see all of the brand new, kind of as close to a skyscraper as Limerick has, which isn't that huge in the grand scheme of things. And so that's one side, but then the other side of it is staring out into the Shannon estuary, and like you're literally watching the river get wider and wider, and down the far end of the estuary is the cement factory, which is this really gloomy, disgusting looking building that's currently being deconstructed at the moment. So like there's a very, for me, that bridge has a very weird specific feeling. It's on, one side of the bridge is beautiful looking into the city, and I kind of get like totally entranced by it, and it's just a thing of beauty. But then on the far side it's disgusting, and it's it makes you kind of, I don't know, it sometimes makes me feel a bit shit about myself. So the whole album like is telling a story about uncertainty and being unsure of your place in life, which is a fairly common thing that most people feel. And it's not necessarily autobiographical, but it's certainly shaped with my own experiences. And basically that song is like lyrically is tying in that overarching message of not being sure, not being very sure about things, and wondering how the hell you're going to get through everything. And the whole walk then is like mulling over that whole process. And so that was it lyrically. The first thing I wrote musically was the little guitar riff at the start. This kind of like, there is certainly a peacefulness on that bridge because it's a little bit away from the rest of the city. So I wanted it to kind of feel like floaty, like, because like the river does tend to actually flow a little slower there as well, because the river is getting wider and wider. So I kind of, we're getting into very airy fairy artsy fartsy stuff straight away, but
that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. I mean, dude. Well, no, and Marty. So that's just to pause for a second on that, because there was so much in that description and what you just rolled out for the concept, and I love it. So just to backtrack, first of all, love how you threw in the pun or not intended overarching theme of it when talking about songs about bridges. But also, yeah, of course, it feels like it does draw such a parallel, whether it's autobiographical or not, in how much detail, to what you're what we were just talking about, which is being in this sense of uncertainty and even transition, right? So I think this will be in so many, the phrase pre-pandemic, and at some point, post-pandemic, whatever that may look like, will be this new era. So this year has been this strange, up and now down, very slow floating bridge across this weird period of time. So it's actually kind of perfect that as hopefully the weather gets nicer, and a lot of parts of the world maybe hopefully get it, things at least a better handle on it moving forward, that this can be their walk through that as well in a lot of ways too, whether that was the intention of the idea or not. But so we talk a lot about this and on the podcast too, but just as songwriters, and I'm a firm believer there's no one right, way or process or system to write a song. In this case, you're talking about one of my favorites and an interesting kind of oblique strategy, which is starting with the end in mind. So you kind of had this parameter shift of, okay, I'm going to physically, conceptualize the amount of time it takes to cross this bridge. And then that will dictate the length of the song, and then everything, all the characteristics about that environment, you thought about those, and then how you wanted to input them into a song and kind of come up with the sonic concept as well as lyrical concept. And I think that's awesome. And I think for any other songwriters or, any musicians out there that are trying to improve their songwriting approach, that's an incredible technique sometimes, because starting is really the hardest part. But sometimes if you know where you want to end up with something, you can kind of work backwards, and that might illuminate some possibilities that fill everything in. We do that a lot with Wonder Years stuff, so like we'll know, hey, we want this song to end in this kind of hyper climactic, really like stressful or tense or cathartic way. And so we say, okay, well then how do we start off so that it evolves to that point? Where's the story? Where do you come into the story? So I love that that you kind of shedded some light on that, and I think it's so cool. And speaking to now you're kind of turning to the arrangement and where you took it instrumentally at first, once you kind of knew, that the story was going to be about this walk, this bridge, this uncertainty, in your life and just in general. So the guitar riff, which is such a cool thing, and you mentioned some really, really imagery-worthy buzzwords there, and talking about floating, and then the idea that it was called the Whistling Bridge. I immediately, if you saw me smiling, it's because I'm picking up and I'm thinking about the song as you put it out there, which I love, and I think in such a cool way means that you did such a great job of capturing those things with the track and with the song and your approach. Because the second you tell me the song, immediately I'm just like, oh yeah, that is how I feel. That is, or that could represent that. So talk to me about the guitar riff, and then, what came next and afterwards, in terms of the whole arrangement. Did you started with the guitar part, and, where did it go from there?
Good question. Trying to remember now. So it definitely did start out with that little kind of small ethereal guitar part, and it was probably the rhythm chords then after that, which generally, like, when it's a lot of stuff that I have written has started off with just, like coming up with chords and then like a vocal melody, and that kind of came second. So if I'm right in saying, I imagine that I just like put that little small guitar riff at the start on loop, and then just tried to like figure out chords that would go behind it. And I did want it to kind of like, like you mentioned about the imagery stuff, and I definitely really appreciate what you're saying. And I guess the Wonder Years is really well known for, going that bit extra when it comes to themes and stuff like that. And I suppose I kind of like, when the guitars and drums came in, I kind of wanted to like smack you in the face in the same way like a gust of wind would when you're going over the bridge. So the second thing would have been the rhythm guitars, and the chorus, definitely the hook for the chorus, like lyrically, that came pretty quickly. And I suppose, yeah, like if we're talking about lyrics specifically, I suppose I wanted it, it's certainly a struggle to bring yourself around to a positive mindset. So I kind of like the idea of, someone, be it metaphorically or actually physically, dragging you across to wherever your destination is, and you know that you need to go there, but you haven't worked it out in your mind quite, like kind of gotten yourself ready for it. So the lyrics for the chorus came very quickly. If you want, I can share my screen and show you the guitar intro, because it's like probably one of only one or two cool things I've probably ever done with production. If that's any use.
Oh, that's nonsense. I'm sure of it, and you read my mind, sir. I would love that. Yeah, why don't you start off and maybe just play the whole intro so we can hear it again, and especially now that you've given us such background, and we'll kind of hear how I love the fact that not only with that little guitar riff, but you almost started sometimes, and I talk about this a lot, and I love the idea that, you know, a song, generally speaking, you know, you have rhythmic elements, melodic elements, and, you know, harmonic structure, right? But I, especially nowadays, and with where technology has landed, especially in terms of instrumentals and music and digital production, I now include texture as a starting point and as a compositional piece of songs. And I love that. And as a lot of guitar players know, anybody that's been bit by the like reverb delay time-based effect bug at some point in their life, it's a very slippery slope and extremely addicting. I'm sure you understand. And so maybe you walk the line, you toe it, and you're like, okay, I got to bring it back. But man, that was great. I love that. And in this way, you took an approach to the intro where it was all about starting with the textural element and creating an atmosphere, an environment. So it wasn't even, you know, what note do I start with? What chord do I start with? It was this sound, which I love. So yeah, tell us about that, how you went about designing that.
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, no, it certainly can be a bit of a rabbit hole when it comes to the reverb and delay stuff, but I think it's a journey that everyone has to go through, and that there's certainly a time and place for it. I'll play you it here just really quick, and then I'll show you what I actually did, because I did do something a little bit weird with it.
Yes.
So you can hear like the massive trail there. So I actually didn't record the guitar with any pedals or anything. That was just a clean signal, and then I bussed it over to another channel, and on that bus had an
I see some tasty stuff.
had an EQ boost in the middle. Then lashed on, 100% wet reverb there.
Little plate. Oh man, shout out Sound Toys. Honestly, I've got all your stuff, so I don't need any free stuff to ask for, but I will be your biggest advocate. That stuff is on every mix or every project that I do. And I use it as, such a creative tool, like you're probably already going to mention here.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely recommend, like, if someone is getting into production for the first time, and the whole plugin world is like a very intimidating thing because there's so many plugins, but the Sound Toys bundle, like, they do a decent amount of plugins, but not an overwhelming amount, and they're all fantastic and very unique and creative. So I definitely recommend that. If you're a student as well, you get a heavy discount on the whole package. And then after that, reverb, this was actually a free one that Valhalla released. It's like a delay reverb modulation thing, and I'll have to double check as to whether that's still free, but it was when they released it, like at the start of the pandemic. And it's just designed to make huge kind of hall reverb stuff. And then after that,
and I think some of those Valhalla stuff were pretty affordable. They were like $30-$50 or whatever for they're like of those, if not free.
They're like vintage reverb one is the one you see on a lot of mixes. This is like more of a delay one. And then after all of that delay, and kind of most importantly for that sound, is just a compressor that's slammed. I actually just used a preset for like a drum parallel compression kind of squasher thing. So just absolutely, blasting it with compression so that like the reverb and delay trails, wash really huge. And I actually said this in the video I did for the walkthrough at Shannon Bridge in relation to a synth. in terms of bussing the effects separately and then having the reverb last. And this was one of the later songs that I wrote in the album and already used that trick on a few synths. So then I was like, right, it could be interesting to do that on a guitar. So that's where all the mad effects come from. But I didn't actually, in terms of the signal when I recorded it through the amp, which for this was a 57 and a 906 with my Japanese Telecaster going through a Vox AC15. That was just, kind of edge of breakup type thing, and
Lovely.
then
Yeah.
put the delay afterwards. From what I've like noticed online is that it's a kind of trick that like Jimmy Eat World uses a lot, and a lot of people in the kind of axe effects world, which is not something that I have the money or privilege or to be in, or I don't know if I want to be there, but that is kind of another technique. Another thing, just really quick, that you're hearing at the start was just like this little drone. It's just a synth pad, which I've since printed because I'm kind of conscious of my CPU. So some of these sounds I've like already committed, which is a little bit of a bummer. But if you're working off a
Hey,
laptop,
you know what? I think that's a great, actually, less a bummer. Sure, they can't see exactly what went down, but a good lesson nonetheless to committing early on to sounds. Because I coming up and doing records with guys like Steve Evans, they come from that old school world of nope, commit it, like let's get the signal right on the way in. Even a lot of times, again, now at this point in my career and things that we do, I think I tend to gravitate towards a hybrid thing. Some things I like to commit in terms of tonal shaping across an entire balance and arrangement to make sure I have that down. But then the creative end of stuff, leaving room to to be expressed and really hype or downplay some of these elements too is really crucial and important. And not to mention, especially a lot of people are working on laptops. There's not a limited amount of RAM or processing power. So anytime you can do that, or even if say you have a really hefty processing chain on something because you're trying to get really like surgical and repair something that maybe wasn't great quality, or trying to salvage something from a demo, the first thing I will do, and this gets into a lot of the strength of taking it from a tracking phase and recording phase into like a mix and post-production phase, and really kind of dividing that line, is committing to this stuff so that you can build and inform the decisions that come after it. So I love that, and I think that's a perfect example of the strength and why to do that, not just saving yourself tracks and power and having the session look good, but to know, okay, this is generally where I want this to sit, and so leave it open and commit and move on from there and form that from there. In the same way, you cut drums and then you get an idea of where your kick drum is going to be sitting, and that gives you an idea of what kind of bass you want to complement it. Or if you're committing to cool guitar centric sound, is let me commit to that, print that sound down. Or even what I mean, like even if you're just like in the analog days, it's like you're notching stuff out, you're giving it a little compression, a little extra sauce, a little EQ if it's coming through a board. Those are all like fitting to these moves that now I think a lot of days, especially when you're in like the DI world, a lot of guys will be in Logic or whatever other DAW. It's so easy to leave everything open-ended. Even if I'm using like STL tones or like Guitar Rig or anything like that, if I get something close, I'll print the sound down and treat it as though it was just a captured sound in the studio, because it's one less thing to think about and one less thing to tinker about. Because I love the versatility, but man, it's a slippery slope, and it's real taxing when you get to the end of a chain and you want that processing power for your effects buses and like a really cool, unique, like screwy reverb chain for your vocal, or for like a guitar effect or a production effect. You don't want to have to be running a ton of amp sims or things like that when you're not really messing with them anyway. So that's great lesson.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up. But
absolutely.
yeah.
It's a little bit scary to like commit those sounds, and at least like I feel like we're probably of like maybe the first generation that's, had the opportunity to like not have to make those decisions when you're
Right.
tracking. So maybe there's an element of fear that's brought about it. But if like probably the best learning lesson I've gotten from the few people around me, like yourself, that are, really good at production, and Mike Gavin, my friend who actually mixed this album, they're all about, just trusting your ears. Like if something sounds good to you, it sounds good. Like you don't have to second guess your own ability in your own ears. If something sounds good in the moment, it more than likely does sound good. So trust yourself and go with it. So that's a lot of the reason for me for bouncing stuff down like that. And like the MIDI instruments do really
Right.
clog up the CPU. So this would have these both of these sounds would have been used with the Arturia Prophet 5. So there's two different sounds. This is like a drone. So it's just one single note. And then this other one comes in that's kind of like a, labeled here, a beep.
Cool.
And the kind of, again, we're going back artsy fartsy stuff here. There's a pedestrian crossing right at the start of that bridge. And like I wanted people to like see the flashing of the light of the pedestrian crossing and kind of have that somewhat represented in the music, as well as it sounding like, I don't know, a countdown to like fucking something's gonna slap you in the face here in a second, which it hopefully ultimately does when the drums kick in. Is actually a question I have for you, Casey. So
Yeah.
the drum sound on this album, especially, this is our third album. I know you've done like 7 albums, am I right in
Oh
saying, or
God. I
6?
mean, yeah, and then with everything in between, you know how it is, like all the little like B-sides,
Yeah,
EP, I do we count like the Burst in Decay stuff?
hard to say.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, I guess,
Yeah.
been lucky to be doing it for a long enough time to get older doing it for sure. But yeah, what's up? What are you curious about?
Well, so like there's very much, at least in my opinion, there's kind of like two schools, where there's, one that is, really sampling the drums a lot and having them sound as fucking huge as possible, which, don't get me wrong, like can definitely sound amazing. And having everything like super to the grid, like hyper edited, really polished, going down that route. And then there is the more kind of like livelier route, where like not everything is like completely chopped to the grid, and there isn't samples for the most part used. And I like, definitely for this album, I really didn't want like a sampled drum type sound, and neither did Brian, who played it. Like we wanted them to sound like drums that were played in a big room, and they were recorded in this studio called the Nave in Leeds, which is, it used to be a kind of a small church, so a huge room. But it is really difficult to get natural drums to sound good, and that is why people use samples. And I listened to a podcast with Mike Trombino, who I think he mixed, was it The Greatest Generation he mixed?
Mark Trombino,
Mark
yeah.
Trombino, sorry, yeah.
No, yeah, yeah. Yes. So this was well. What did he say on the podcast first? Because I'm curious if this came up too. But
Yeah, I don't want to be like putting someone on blast, but what he said was that he was so used to mixing the more like pop punk, that's more on the pop side of things, and used to
right,
just samples, like completely sampled, hyper compressed, huge sounding. And he mixed that record the same way he'd been doing the other stuff in that genre, and then had sent it on to Yi, and that wasn't the sound you're going for at all, and he wanted it without samples. And then he went back and did do it, and it's an incredible album. It's maybe my favorite album by years. And it certainly, that type of sound lends itself to it. So what was it, what was that like for year
right.
from your end?
So you could probably see from the smile on my face the second you started diving in. I knew exactly where you were going. The age-old debate in this era. I have friends on both sides. I tend to, shocker, not to be bland, but I tend to find myself somewhere right in the middle right now. And that's to say that, yeah, I think you have to play to what kind of sound whoever is. So if it's a client that's coming to me to mix their song, mix a record, right? I think the communication element of what they're going for and the reference stuff that they send informs a lot of that, right? Because then if I give a mix back and they're like, hey, this is like super, super raw, or we want something like way bigger, be like, well, your references were these like old school throwback records where it's almost no samples underlaid, or it's just like also being realistic about it's like, well, I mean, I will do the best I can, but realize that the records that you sent, the budget for that, they probably spent like $100,000 for the studio time and engineers in like one of the top 10 studios in the country to cut drums on that record, 20 years ago. And you guys cut them in a bedroom in your, apartment that was roughly the size of like a closet and a half, and that's not to say that you can't get good results from that, and knowing how to go about it. But in some ways it's like, well, listen, that what you're hearing is that room, right? So at some point, if that's what you're looking for, there's going to have to be some sort of manipulation in there to bring it closer to that picture, because the organic sounds themselves just aren't necessarily there in terms of what you want. So that's the first, communication thing that if I get tracks and I'm like, hey, what you're shooting for, one of two options, right? But then beyond that, I love, and I think a lot of it is about getting an incredible performance and the drummer that you play on the track and having them be consistent. So Michael found this out with Wonder Years stuff real early. Evitz obviously is a monster when it comes to engineering and tracking, and he will be the first to tell you that one of his biggest secrets is hitting consistently and getting the most out of the drums on the way in, not just saying, hey, technically I just have to hit that drum, but saying, hey, that rack tom that you hit when you went around on that fill, that was a little too light. Like, let's do it again and really dig in with the left hand on that to get the instrument to speak in the same way that, like, you can't do that with the guitar if you kind of try to cheat it. I mean, you can. It's called high gain, and we all love it. But, if you try to, like, cheat and just like, well, technically I got the note. Yeah, but maybe it doesn't sound great. You're not selling it. So drums, I kind of look at it the same way, as I'd rather have somebody sit there, and if we have the time, to really go in and execute the parts, the groove, and get it as close. I'm also a realist. I'm not going to sit there and be like, hey, let me really like kill all of your momentum and inspiration as a musician and creative and have you keep doing the same thing just to like get one hit 5 milliseconds later, in a fill. It's like, that's saving and preserving the balance of creativity and vibe and utilizing what tools you have, So that's why I say I think I fit somewhere in the middle, but I try to get the best capture of the performance on the way in so that I need to do as little editing and as little supplementation as possible. However, a lot of people, and especially younger bands who are coming with reference tracks, and the bands that they're growing up listening to bands, if it's in our world, in like the pop punk scene or just the general like guitar driven rock or hard rock scene, they're used to hearing heavily processed like stuff that is that old like 80s Motley Crue like hyper gated snares and like everything crushed on the way in, and it's engineers that figured out how to do that in the analog domain, but they also had players that could really do that. So if that's the sound, I'd look at it as part of a creative decision too, and saying, hey, samples are just another tool, just like you would layer some sort of programming or keys or a synth behind it. I look at it as the underlying performance is still there, and I make sure that when I treat some things or add layered samples to the shells, or in terms of reverb samples or however I treat it, that I usually do it in a parallel manner, right? I never like trade it out and just like, here's my MIDI, everything, here are my like keystrokes, my key hits, and everything's 127 hyper velocity so that you get that because I think that's what people start to associate with, I fucking hate samples. When it's not done right, I think the energy and the subtle fluctuation of how a drummer plays should translate through the samples as well. So it's really just giving each hit, a bit. It's taking the consistency level of some of those up, but without losing the energy dynamics and which preserves a lot of the natural inherent groove of a drummer. So I know that there's a lot to it, and there's even more. I go into treating things in like a parallel manner and bussing things out in some ways like that to help blend things to make them feel more natural, and utilize a lot of like the parallel compression techniques so that it's not as apparent, or that if they want it more apparent and want the snare to be like a shot to your chest every time, and just destroying you, and feel like a cannon blast, then I have a couple faders to adjust that, and push that end of it a little quicker. So maybe that answers the question. But as far as Wonder Years, yeah, I mean, with that record, we were very in the nature because of the conditioning and the work that, that we had put in to tracking things really well ahead of time. We were like, hey, we did this because we didn't want to have to rely as heavily on samples, so it's totally fair. And for him to assume something like that is totally okay too, because he has a process and he has his ear, and, the goal as a engineer like that, as a mix engineer especially, is to make the client, happy, to give that, to totally realize their vision. So, he, just kind of went, assumed that we were coming to him for his taste, which was true. And his taste for that modern era had landed him to, put that forward. But also then we had communicated our way through and got to a record that we're all super proud of and super happy with. So, it's whatever the job requires and whatever sound the band's going for. I think there's a way to do it subtly so that you can embellish and elevate something, but not make it sound false or static. So
yeah, it's a hard one. Like, there is a stigma there around it, which I don't think is like justified or anything. It is just like you hit the nail on the head there. Like, what type of sounds do you actually want? And while when I was younger, like, I was really into punk and pop punk stuff, it really is not what I listen to at all anymore. And the artist I listen to the most is like The National, Bon Iver, and that is a more natural kind of a drum sound. And while you might lose some of the high fidelity pop side of things, you gain in feel. And that's not to say that someone else might that type of recording drums might sound absolutely terrible on a Neck Deep album or something like that. So yeah, and I will say, like, so we tracked the drums in a different studio. Brian, with the help of a guy called Andy Hawkins, is an incredible engineer. And when it comes to like my experience with recording, the drums is where I'm least confident, and it's also, in my opinion, the hardest thing to do. So we drafted in some of his help. So that was recorded in a proper studio. Everything else was recorded in this cabin in the woods Airbnb thing that I recorded, or that I rented. And it was just myself there with like basically all the equipment I have here, and I just moved it all over there. And I do think that, like, while there is like such crazy advancements with home recording, and I am a strong believer that you don't have to spend an arm and a leg right now to make an incredible sounding album. Drums, it's harder without nice fancy expensive stuff in a nice fancy expensive room. So I'll give you a blast of the drums here on their own with a bit of bass if you like. And
yes, I would love to, please.
This is an example of the drums in a nice fancy expensive place, and then the bass was straight DI in with one of these UA plugins. And I'll give you a little small bit here. This is Brian Scally on the drums. kind of hear there, like right at the end, just like how hard he's hitting the shells,
Right.
and like taking it handier on the cymbals, which is like from having the absolute pleasure of getting to tour with Yee, like Mike Kennedy beats the absolute piss out of the drums, but like it's more the shells than the cymbals, which I do think is like an important way of getting this type of drum sound.
No, and that's what I said, Marty. You're all too right. And when it comes to those drums, man, the secret sauce is the player and the capture. You are the first level and layer of mixing is balancing up here, balancing this hand and this hand. Well, if you're a righty, right? Balancing shells and metallics. And that is so when we did Sister Cities with Joe Ciccarelli at Sunset a couple years ago, very illuminating. Obviously, that guy is on a next level in terms of the career he's had, like, wall of Grammys, and just knows everybody in the business, and knows how to make records, and how to make records, I'll say with the old school philosophy, but in that, capturing drums and things like that through that Neve console there, the first thing, and you watch him interact with Kennedy, it's like you want that energy, but the first thing he'll be like, hey, we got to do it again, like give me like 10% less on the crashes at the end there, because he's mixing it, using the player, but also keeping in mind you don't want to be like, you've got to adjust to them to get in the rough ballpark that fits, where the levels that are coming in when they're at 100%, aren't distorting in a musical, energetic way. But at the same time, he'll know it's like, that was great, everything was there, but that one crash was just spiked in the overheads, and it's going to sound weird. I'm going to have to like chase a bunch of shit with automation and, multiband stuff, compression stuff. So he will be like, let's do it again, but give me like 5% less on the cymbals. And then you'll see it and be like, that's awesome, but you came down like 5% on everything. Like I still, and it's years and years, and he'll be the first to tell you that, of refining that balance and understanding what it means to be like a smasher and throw your whole body into a hit, but you're throwing it into the snare hit and like a rim shot, but compensating just a little bit extra so that you're not going all the way through, especially in a studio. And mastering that is how you get good results, and how you can ultimately with this kind of stuff. I hear so much of that room. It's an incredible room on that snare, right? And how you're able to boost that because you don't have the cymbal wash destroying everything, and everything's in balance and proportion because he's leaning into it. So that's the first thing I heard there. So I love that you can kind of hear that, and yes, the consistency, right? It's like you look at every snare hit and you're just like, that could be a room sample for all but it's, you can tell that there's a realness and organicness to it, and that's how you get that. You get a good drummer, that can play good solid takes in a groove. Right?
We're very lucky to have one in Brian as well. Before we did this, I put a little thing out just on Instagram if anyone had any like questions for you. And speaking, about the Wonder Years recording, one of the most common, it was a very similar question that came back for a lot of people, and I suppose it's like probably the most logical thing to talk about next in this session as well. But in relation to Wonder Years, you've 3 guitar players, and the guitar can only occupy so much space, and you have an amazing singer and lyricist as well that like needs to be at the forefront. So how do you actually manage the duties when it comes to guitars, and for it not to just like transcend into like a messy chaos? And I'm saying that with there's 45 tracks here, but that's with the drums just as a stereo thing. So there's probably like, there's maybe like 75 or 80 tracks in total here, and that's the most I've done. And definitely the hard part with this song, and you'll see if we get down further into like when the piano kicks in and stuff, like there's a lot of instruments occupying in a similar kind of frequency spectrum, and it was quite challenging to like figure out what ones to notch in and out. And with 3 fantastic melodic guitar players, as well as Nick playing doubling up on synth as well, like how do you manage those duties and get the as best results as possible out of it?
Right. Well, we do get asked that quite a good bit, but I never tire of talking about it because I think it's really relevant regardless of how many guitar players you have. We happen to have three, and at this point, it's been a growing process and a learning process, but also I think working through that process with all three of them, and you know, all like extremely talented musicians in their own right that come from their own, you know, backgrounds and perspectives with taste. It can be really illuminating because we'll take one part or one song and three guitar players might have a different take from section to section. So I think a lot of it comes down to, in terms of us, and you know, this sounds you know, kind of like a really broad answer, but the truth is that we let the song and or the section dictate where we go. It's we take or try to take the ego out of, nah, but I want to play, or I have this really cool thing, like I want to, you know, I want to play this, like, well, this part has like a cool thing, I wrote it over it, I really want to play it, and step back and be able to communicate with each other and say, what do we want out of this section in this song, right? And if it's to hit you in the fucking face, how do we achieve that, right? Cool. Sounds like maybe like a good place to double up on some rhythm, right? So maybe that's what two guitars do, and you know, we figure out what the third component is. Is there a vocal over that section that needs to take stage? Well, then we're probably not going to put some ripping lead straight up the center, you know, right on top of it, right? So thinking about it from an arrangement standpoint like that, but then also it's in composition, and that's really where I think the strength has started to solidify, especially for us, is, you know, talking about the arrangement of a song, starting with the bones of it, starting with the melody, the grooves, the, you know, the chord, maybe like the fundamental riff, you know, that everything kind of is wound around, or builds off of. And then figuring out a way to adjust the dynamic of that to make an interesting song structure that complements the story that the lyrics are telling, and also elevates it and keeps things really interesting, right? So we almost look at that as our, you know, the guitar approach to saying, sure, we always want to shred, always love a good riff, right? When you got it, let's put it out there. If it's great, then I don't think any of us are going to be like, don't play a lead there. It's like, no, you got to recognize the gold when you see it and when you feel it, and you're like, oh, fuck no, there's no way that we're not having you play that at least twice in this song. It's too good. And making sure that the lead that's the strongest one is the one that, you know, that will win out in that sense, and then knowing when to take a back seat, right? Knowing when to be like, hey, honestly, it works better if it's just that lead, the drums and bass. Like, that's way cooler. I absolve myself of anything for this section. Or in Nick's case, that's part of the strength where we started to use that as like a, hey, let's from section to section vary the texture, so it's not just guitar-based texture all the way through, so that we can have this section, we go to a key thing. So you're still having a bit of that mid-range or filling things out, but in a different way, so that the ear is subtly changing and shifting, and those colors can shift based on the instrumentation and arrangement. So that's trying to take the ego out and be less selfish and say, what makes the strongest song and structural arrangement for us is how we look at it. You know, there's a lot of things vying for that mid-range, you know it, and making sure that it's like it's an easy thing to fill up that mid-range, right?
Absolutely.
And it's maybe harder because then you almost shoot yourself in the foot where you're like, damn, now I'm having to like notch out, like scoop the hell out of like almost everything I have here. The vocal still seems a little like buried and cloudy no matter what I try to do to put it over. Yeah, then things like that are, you know, indicators that maybe strip it down. Honestly, when I'm mixing, the mute button is my best friend when it comes to guitars. If I get tracks where it's like a layer of guitars, or even stuff that I've done, I'm like, we doubled up the guitars here, or like quad tracked a riff, right? And I'm just like, you know what? Maybe I'm just going to take out two of those doubles and just take that one of the doubles and just put it up the center very low. And that's like it's like a very Tom Lord Alge kind of stereo spread thing, where instead of just two rhythms like quad tracked or whatever, you'll just float one of them, or sometimes he'll just like chop one of the tracks in like the back half and copy and paste it and flip it over and make like a manual double, and just kind of tuck that lightly underneath. And I mean, try that, honestly, because I also tried it and I was like, well, fuck, if there isn't a difference, like, you know, just the slightest bit, but it does something to this like stereo stream, even if you have a vocal, and playing with things like that too. Sometimes like that's less, right? You have like 2 or 3 less doubles, but it just clears everything out. It still makes it wider. So thinking like that is how we, at least, you know, it all starts with the writing too, and figuring out what the parts, what is appropriate and what's not. So, you know, well, we don't always get it right either, you know.
Yeah.
We didn't always get it right, and we won't always get it right, but also I find solace in the fact that, like you said before, right is kind of a subjective thing, you know. As long as we're trusting our gut and making the song we want to make, who cares, right? Just putting it out and getting it out there and seeing what it does is more important to us at this point, I think. So
yeah, and that's sick that you can have those conversations. Yeah, like there's a little bit of that going on here in terms of, so like when the...
Yeah, tell me what you got here with, I love me some guitar stacks, dude.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. So when the rhythm guitar comes in with the kind of like synthy one, like you're seeing 2 tracks here, but that's just because there's 2 mics on the cab, a ribbon and a 57, and
this is the AC-15.
that was actually the Blues Junior.
That's okay.
So yeah, it pretty jangly sound though. That's because it is the Telecaster on the middle pickup. So that's like the main rhythm sound, and it is like a type of sound that I go for a lot.
I love it.
So it's like pretty like bitey, but I like that. And then in the chorus, then a third one comes in, like just straight down the middle with those other ones. That's like, I think actually that's my Gibson. So I from Pennsylvania actually found one in Altoona when I was over there last November, and it was just the body of a ES 335 from 1971. And I brought the body home with me, had no paint, no nothing, no parts, and I spent the last few months rebuilding it. So that guitar down the middle is the 335, which it's so sick now that I've got like a vintage 335 on.
It's been resurrected. We love it. Do you have it nearby?
I do actually. Hang on, let's see.
You got to show it off. You can't come at me with a story like that and not show it to me.
Let's see if you can see this here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, such a beaut. We love it.
Yeah, so like I would contribute the whole fact of me learning guitar as a result of Chuck Berry with Johnny B. Good. So
amazing.
Had to go for the red. So that's what you're hearing down the middle. It's a very different sound, but it's playing similar chords to the rhythm. So the chorus then together sounds like this. And then my friend Niall O'Sullivan played a lead part down the middle as well. So it's like kind of very Interpol sounding. Interpol are one of my favorite bands. So like that's so short. Like that would have been a Memory Man delay pedal. And then Niall, speaking of like track guitars, like that's the bulk of it. But then in the outro, and like Anna's Anchor has been like the semi solo project where, you know, I've gotten friends to help out from time to time, but the majority of the time it's just me. But this particular song is actually way different because there's Brian on drums, who's played every recording for drums for Anna's Anchor. There's myself, obviously, and then there's Niall playing guitars, which is the first time someone else played some guitar parts on an Anna's Anchor recording. and I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit, but my friend Claire did some harmonies as well. So all of the outro songs, or all of the outro guitars, Niall actually came up with and played himself, which, you know, was like a cool thing where I had to like step away for a minute, and which was a little bit scary for someone who's over controlling like me. But here's the outro guitar parts. So there's actually like two parts going on left and right. There's that interpoly one. There's this acoustic, and then there's this crazy. Actually, so this is something you can't really hear in the final version, but you know, I was doing the like self-modulating thing where I was like twisting the delay time on the pedal that he was playing and building it up. So this is what it sounds like on its own. So you can't really hear it, but it's fairly buried. But like,
no, I love that. So yeah, and just for anybody listening, so you committed that, right? So he was playing through that chain in advance, and that's what we're listening to, or
yeah. So
right.
Niall was actually playing it just like we actually recorded that in the house here where I live in a terraced house, and we set up the amps in the room next door, had it blaring. I'd say the neighbors fucking hate us for that, but I was like, right, we're just like 2 hours, and we're going to do these couple of parts here. And yeah, so
just bring him a bottle of wine, you know, after it's all said and done.
Yeah.
Smooth it over.
Well, our neighbor, he does play bass, and I hear him from time to time ripping Africa by Toto. So I feel like there's a little bit of leniency we can get away with.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that was
sure.
Niall just playing. That was actually I'm pretty sure that was that was actually Rickenbacker that I borrowed off my friend John.
Yeah.
And going into a few different delay pedals, and while he was playing, I was on my hands and knees, you know, turning the knobs, which is a very fun thing.
That's the stuff. When we were talking earlier about committing, whether it's like printing stuff down, whatever, the early days, this is one of the things that working with Steve really got me, really had me fall in love with, because there are certain things that you can only do. And I mean, every Wonder Years record at this point, every song, it is a communal effort. And talk about the fact of having multiple guitar players. I mean, I wish you could have seen what it was like when we were in the studio last summer, where we had Steve in a setup not that much different to this on FaceTime in the control room, our bud Andy rolling tape, and Nick, guitar, driver's seat, pedals on the ground, and me like talking with Steve and being like, cool, I'm gonna like do this swell and slowly, gradually, then you're gonna hit this, and then I'm gonna throw that pedal on right at the bridge, then you're gonna start tremolo picking, and then the mod wheel's gonna have to go up at this time, and just doing like you would do takes, just doing 3 or 4 passes until we got it just right. And that's all printed live. That's not like, you're not going to be able to like reamp that sound, but it's carving out those effects. Like even just, you know, anybody with a delay pedal, yes, set it and just fuck with that mod wheel, but then learn what they do and how to manipulate them. And with so much of the stuff that are on our records, getting the tails on something just right, or cutting a tail off, sometimes it's like, it's going to be way more natural if you just keep a riff rolling and some of the trails keep going, but you take like the reverb pedal off, right? You know, and things like that you can only really get by doing it on your hands and knees. And every record I do with the band, some of them come in and are like, dude, are you good? You're just like down there and like, what are you doing? I'm just like, I'm hitting record, play it again. Like, and you know what I mean? It's like, okay, again, that was me. You nailed it. I fucked up. That was me. I'm going to get it right this time. And just doing it until it's like, you get that perfect sweet spot. So I love that you did it. And then you have an example, this kind of cool textural element that you're only really going to get by being there and turning a knob, right? So it kind of does harken back to that analog environment and that level of like human interactiveness that I try to, whenever, even if I'm using like a Sound Toys plugin or some sort of, there's tons of shit that sounds incredible, but I always put my like what knob would I be twisting and how cap on when I'm using them, right? So learning it from just like on your pedal board and knowing every fucked up sound that every pedal can make, and having someone there with you kind of be like, hey, honestly, like really swell up the depth on that chorus as I kind of keep playing this riff, so it keeps evolving and like just get a friend and go to town and experiment, because that's the stuff that you will learn when you start to go and track things creatively like you did here, and then you have that sound committed, and it's a unique little gem that you could sit for how long you're with plugins and trying to like do something similar, and you're never going to get it just to react just like that.
Yeah, totally, I agree. And I'm like a very big proponent of like, at this stage now, like I'll always be buying gear, but like I have a set of tools and I know exactly what all of them do, and the different sounds they produce, the different textures they make, the different kind of frequencies that they occupy in. And I love having, good, decent, reliable kind of set of tools to use that you know what it does, as opposed to just buying everything and anything and then really not fully knowing what everything does. I do think there is value in like knowing the absolute ins and outs of every single thing, and like most of these guitar sounds didn't take us that long to draw them up, because it's all gear that I have here and that I'm very used to. So that was very fun.
Yeah. So I love that. The one, and also a quick shout out in terms of, learning how with multiple guitars and pulling them in and making them work. One thing that you're mentioning that I want to address and really quickly reiterate is the fact that you're using different guitars, right? So I think a lot of home recording and a lot of people, it's like, sure, if you only have one guitar and that's it, that's fine. Do what you can with what you've got. But I think part of it, especially in terms of having stuff cut through and making sure that it doesn't just sound like this mush of, a ton of guitars, and trying to get a wider overall sound, is making sure that the differences between the guitars and the sounds are there. Even if they're subtly, when you're tracking, it's like, sure, maybe you leave the same amp and mic setup, but switch guitar for a double of it, so it's not the exact same overlapping thing, because you don't need to have that. You want some little slightly different color harmonics, to really layer stuff and make it worthwhile. And if it's a lead, using the same guitar, same sound, and it's fine when I'm writing, I'll duplicate a track and just like real quick. But when it comes to a mix thing, that's where a lot of the time is spent trying to get things right in a production capacity, is taking a guitar sound and then choosing the right chain from a different amp, from a different mic. Use, maybe you have two mics on an amp, 57 and like a Royer, right? Maybe for one track, use the 57, and then the other track kind of flip over for a different sound and use the Royer, and it'll give you, an adjust to taste. Even subtle things like that can help make really like guitar-rich things feel balanced and interesting, and not just like it's a bunch of copy and paste guitar doubles. And and I think that's a great thing that you kind of displayed here by talking about. And it was this guitar, and then he used this guitar for the lead. So I wanted to make sure that anybody kind of following along or watching this in post definitely
cheers.
has a
Thanks.
respect to that. For
and
sure.
I would
super important.
if someone's just kind of like getting into producing their own music and recording and stuff, like not everyone has the luxury to, like I have a few guitars here, but like I still borrowed a bunch off of friends before I went away, and I'd highly recommend that, because more than likely you have other friends that play instruments, and if you're going to a way to record them, like don't be afraid to ask them, like, can I actually borrow that guitar for a day or two? Like, you can borrow mine whenever you want. Like I said, I borrowed that Rickenbacker from John. I borrowed some guitars from Mike. And I'll always do that for little sessions here and there, so I have an extra thing. And playing a different instrument in particular can be that little bit of inspiration. And like, there were definitely guitar parts that I hadn't written before I'd gone in there to actually record it. So like, having a new kind of instrument that gives you a fresh mindset can be quite helpful.
Absolutely. Oh, Nick and Matt are probably super tired of me being like, dude, what do you let me grab this amp for a weekend, or it's like, what's good with that bass six, Nick? Like, you using that right now, and back and round it goes. But at the same token, it's just like anytime anybody wants to borrow it, I am always so happy to help facilitate the creative process and get the results. So yeah, bug your friends for gear, especially if you only have one guitar. You probably know somebody else that has a different one. So yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
But let's talk about the vocals real quick before we wrap up, because I'm really curious how you went about tracking those. Did you track those from home, or did you step into a studio for that, or what was your process?
I did them all in the Airbnb that I'd rented. So it was a house, but it was like this cottage that was out in the middle of nowhere, had no internet or no phone signal or anything. So it was just in a house, and I actually left it inside in the other room, I think, but it actually might be in this other box here, but it was the lead ones were tracked on this Jay-Z mics V67, so they're an Estonian a Latvian company, and it's just a large diaphragm condenser. It's really nice, and I have to give them a thank you because I got a 55% discount because they were so nice, so that really helped. But I was like, right, yeah, I've used this SM7 for a lot of vocals. It's fantastic. All the like harmonies and stuff was with the SM7, and then just for this album, I got the Jay-Z. So one other thing as well, which is like probably worth mentioning, and it's something that both of us are using right now, is like I've interface wise of the Universal Audio Apollo, and I use the UA console a lot, and like talking about the committing to sounds thing, going in when I was tracking initially, I had a Neve 1073 plugin on the like Unison Audio pre, and then I had a compressor on the insert as well that was like being recorded straight away, and like light compression, nothing too crazy, but trying to make the person that's mixing's job a little bit easier from the get-go, and so that like for me monitoring and me listening back to it, that'll sound kind of in the ballpark of where it'll be when it's mixed, because I find sometimes, and we've talked about this before, and that like both of us have taught and still do teach, and vocals, like totally untreated vocals, sound like shite. And if you're not a super confident singer like me, when you listen back to them that don't have compression and a little bit of EQ on them, it might taint how you perceive those vocals, and you might be sick of it, when in truth, just with a little bit of tweaking, it might actually sound lovely. So I didn't want to have to listen back to this a million times while I was tracking everything with the vocals, having like a crazy dynamic range that were going to piss me off. So I did use some of that on the way in. So there's a lead vocal, actually it's not something I do very often, but the vocals in the verse are doubled and then tripled in the chorus.
Where should I go? I'm afraid to be alone, watching the undertow.
So there's crazy effects going on there.
I love it. I just have to say, it sounds like, knowing you and having like talked with you in person, and even seeing you sing live, it's just like hearing these isolated. Even when I was listening to the track, I was like, man, is that him? Like not in a, I mean, it sounds phenomenal, but it just like the timbre of your singing voice versus speaking voice is the color and the way it sits is so different, but in such a cool way. I mean, just you should in no way be ashamed of your vocals.
Well,
they sound great, and they sound super powerful. But yeah, so doubling the choruses,
triple the chorus actually. So double the verse. Right. It's not something we would normally do though. Yeah. So then the chorus tripled, just to add an extra little bit. And there is actually one other bit. So following the piano, there's one line on its own with a little line. I'll play it here for you.
Drag me across the river to see that there is a glimmer. Drag me.
So there's that there is a glimmer bit, and that actually I had tracked that again when we went into the house, of course, and when Mike Gavin was mixing it, that there is a glimmer line, it just didn't sound right. It didn't sound great, and we ended up actually taking the one from the demo and chopping it into the actual final session. It was just whatever way I had said it came out the best. And there is, I'd said,
Use more demos. This comes up so often. I mean, well, you wouldn't be surprised because clearly you've seen it in action. But I think a lot of bands that I work with, or especially if it's a project I'm producing nowadays, within even the last like year and a half, the amount of stuff that I end up using, and this is why I say the pre-production phase of something, where I'm like chopping up, or we're sending Logic sessions back and forth, or doing some rearrangement stuff. I'll sometimes chop up a vocal and be like, hey, this would be cool. Maybe like, what if we threw this line here, with the intent of like, hey, maybe like you'll change it, we'll recut it once we like figure out what all works, and send a production mock-up. I, at least once on every project, I've gone back and been like, nope, I'm going to use the vocals, the scratch vocals that he sent me from the demo for that little intro effect, or for that little bridge thing, because there's something about just the way he did it, like that. Now when he tried to recut it, and kind of like what you're expressing, it's like, I don't know, it sounds too perfect, and like it sounds too dialed in. I want the call it maybe just a touch of demoitis if you're used to listening and hearing that exact thing. But there's something about it where I am no longer afraid. And this is why, if you're capturing something or writing, make sure you just like set your levels decently, so you're not clipping, because you never know what might happen. And you might be like, honestly, I fell off a chair recording this and it made the weirdest fucking sound when it hit the mic. But I love it, right? Somebody actually just asked me about I did like a little playthrough of the Burst and Decay Washington Square Park recently. Been fun, like just playing, and it gives me a reason to pick up the acoustic. And I kind of forgot about how the production of that song ended up. Did that with a friend of ours, Ascenders, and that little like that little production like glitchy thing is actually just a little soundbite of me starting to play the riff through it when we were doing scratch tracks, and it just like got some sort of weird fret buzz or string buzz on the low string once, and like did this weird thing, and we went back and chopped that little thing, and that's what we made that little glitch beat out of, by reversing it and blowing it up, and and bit crushing it, kind of thing. And I hadn't really thought about it until that person asked me. It's like, what is that sound, and why'd you guys put it in? The answer, why'd we put it in? Because we wanted to. Shut up. And B, because we wanted some sort of other percussive element there that wasn't just drums, right? We wanted to save the drums and the arrangement for later, but but didn't want it to just come in and be just the acoustic. We were like, we wanted something a little bit more atmospheric and interesting to start the track, and so we clipped it from a portion of that scratch track, that was a fuck up, essentially a mistake. Not that I make them, but I do every day.
Nice. That's sick.
And sometimes it's nice to have them, right? And so, yeah, this is a perfect example of, you went back and you're like, hey, actually the scratch ain't that bad. Let's just throw it in and call it a day.
Yeah, and that's how I got into production kind of in the first place. Well, partly, to use it with my teaching, but also just to kind of improve my ability to demo, and then, that kind of got me into the rabbit hole. So yeah, and then there is harmonies then on top of it, done by Claire. I don't think we used both of them. I think we just used one of them.
Drag me across the river to sea. Drag me across the river to sea.
She's just,
I love that low one.
yeah,
Low to the,
she's a phenomenal singer. And then Claire also, actually, in the outro, she was just like, I'm just going to try something, might sound terrible, I'm just going to do one take before I go home to my son. But she just put in this like mad ad lib thing that kind of sounds a little bit like kind of like Dolores O'Riordan from the Cranberries type thing. and I normally wouldn't be like a huge fan of something like that, but just buried with everything else in the outro, it just sounded really cool. So this is it in context. You might not have, people may not
No,
have even
I
picked up on
definitely
it.
saw. I heard it when I was listening, and I love that you brought this up. Yeah,
Yeah.
play it in context, and then I have, God, I have some thoughts.
Infinity Trail there on the guitar.
Oh, love it. So, okay, so this is a great thing of like, don't never be afraid to just try something, right? So this was like end session, end of the day. This is beautiful. Also, I love her leaning on that major seventh for an extra long time. The line is just super, super cool and adds this like tension and texture and little bit of like really nice ethereal rub there. So I guess my question with stuff like that is how in a mix was that treated then, or how did you go about kind of using that creatively, or when it was time you said, hey, we have this part, I think this is like a cool way to maybe wrap up and talk about, since you had somebody else mix the project, but you had captured everything and done the arrangements. What is that process like then for you, working out of a home? And obviously you mentioned you did the drums remotely, which I think is a big trend now. Everybody wants drums, but maybe they can't afford to book the time in a studio, don't have a session drummer or a friend that's like up to speed to like really nail it. So I know I've been working with a couple incredible musicians, and just like, hey, I have a track here, solo artist or whatever, or their drummer can't do it, and but they want to cut the song, and we'll send tracks out, and he will just either do them in his home studio setup or whatever. And at that point, it's like, I know he's a good enough player that even the capture in like not a beautiful cathedral-esque room is still going to be a great capture, and I can work with it and take it into that context. But also, you're doing so much of the vocal stuff on your own too, and you have learned obviously how to capture it and how to get yourself in a great mindset as an artist and as a performer, using some of the Apollo stuff and on the way in, which in the analog domain is, they get a sound pretty close. So what you're hearing is a really inspirational vocal sound and representation of yourself too. So all of that is incredible, and you're able to do that now on your own, but this is the part of the process where you kind of let it go. So I'm curious how, and I'm sure a lot of people would also kind of wonder, and this is a thing too, where taking on, mixed projects from other people, that's the last final extension of trust, right? You kind of have to let your baby go a little bit. And what kind of guidance or notes when it comes to things like that do you give them? Or, we talked about reference tracks, obviously, are always a good idea, but I think this is the last part of the process. I'd love to hear about how you approach it and what you kind of gave him ahead of time or during the process. We talked about, obviously, Mark and everything with us, but...
Yeah, so I suppose for this, luckily Mike Gavin, who mixed it, he is one of my best friends, and I do really trust him. And most of what I know in relation to production is kind of as a result of previously recording with Mike and learning from him. And I definitely would recommend, actually, as well, is like, it's fantastic if you're going to like school for something like this. I know that you went to Drexel as well, Casey, but the best way to learn is just from watching someone else. And I've watched Mike, and I've watched other producers that I've worked with, and I totally trust Mike first and foremost. So the likes of this ad lib, and I forgot to mention it earlier, but there is piano parts from my friend James Hanley, and I had already written some piano parts as just like absolute basic things, and James, then he sent me on two versions where one was like really fancy and one was simple, and between all four piano parts I couldn't really tell which was like the one to use. And in same with that ad-lib thing, we thought like in the moment, like, okay, that is interesting, but we don't know whether that's like good enough or will actually be will occupy a necessary spot. So sent them all onto Mike and was like, like not everything has to be in here. Like, I don't take any personal, insult if something has to be removed from there. And Mike's initial instinct was like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. So we were like, he actually gave it a go from the start himself and kind of thought, yeah, I'm not feeling that, and muted it. And it wasn't until the whole thing was mixed that he was like, okay, I'll just unmute this here and see how that sounds. And I was like, whoa, okay, this actually, this can have a place in there. And I think from the perspective of a musician sending on to someone that's mixing, and I think like maybe you've experienced this, Casey, because I haven't mixed someone else's stuff, I've only mixed my own stuff, is that like sometimes musicians will get like so fixated on the way that it's like coming off when they've tracked it, and they think that's the best it sounds because they're used to hearing that so much. And like probably the last thing you want to hear as a mix engineer is like, can you make it sound more like the demo, or can you make it more sound like the version we sent over to you? Which I understand that concern, but you really do have to put your trust in the person that's mixing it and take on their perspective. So like, I fully trusted Mike in that regard as well. So that's how we did it.
That's amazing. And to be able to find somebody like that so you had previously worked with him a little bit. So there was that existing relationship already there. But sometimes it's not the case. We'd never worked with Mark when we sent it off. We were just familiar with his work and knew we liked a lot of his work. So yeah, sometimes you do get in those scenarios. I think, the communication up front of anytime, especially someone like this, we're more than capable and competent, obviously, to probably send over your rough mix, right? That in a lot of ways informs a lot of where you're thinking and how you are viewing parts to be laid out, whether it's, even having just tracks being like guitar left, rhythm right, lead center. Like I always say, prepping your tracks, and I did on the True Level Instagram page, did like a little quick list of things just based on my own experiences learning and seeing how sometimes people obviously treat things differently, but like sending tracks out for working with somebody else to do mix work or finish off your track, even something as simple as labeling stuff where it belongs and indicating through the name where you have it, or just sending out a rough mix of it so that they know, okay, this is what you've heard, this is what you're used to hearing, and then going from there. And yeah, the goal I think is to always take the idea of what they're doing and just elevate it and clean it up and make sure it hits and does all the things that they're wanting each section to do, but amplifies those moments. And I mean, that's the approach that I take. But again, I think there is a lot of creativity. And if if you get into the world of expressing a desire for someone to bring that creativity again, like, so I'm a musician, so but sometimes I also have to realize it is not my thing, so I would maybe default to do it one way, and there are maybe some of those moments where you have to default to this is the artist and this was their vision for this, so then ultimately I'll go back to them if there's something that I'm like, hey, I'm not sure if this fits, and have the conversation, if they're like, hey, what happened to this, like you muted it or whatever. But I try to do that up front to be like, hey, are you cool with me playing around with some of the arrangement? You threw a lot here, I'm not sure we need all of it, maybe I'll just give you my first initial thought and then we can talk about that from there. And then your third guitar player will be like, where's my lead in this pre-chorus? And be like, it was like clashing with the vocal because it was like, had like weird like half step rubs and whatever. And then maybe sometimes it's a way that they didn't, think about their lead. And sometimes it's like, hey, I'm looking at the big picture, I'm zooming out, and maybe, that's the objectivity of passing it along to somebody else that hasn't been there in the weeds, in the trenches of writing every little, nuance and part that I think that's also a really, really valuable strength and asset to know when pulling somebody else in to finish something else will make it potentially stronger, right? So for you, it's like you put it probably, I'm sure, obviously, even just this session here, it's like you could have mixed it yourself, but you went out to somebody else that you had a relationship with, that you trusted, that you knew their process, knew their work, and allowed them to add something even deeper and richer to it that you might not have in the same way. And I think that's one of the pillars of understanding how to grow as an artist, as a musician, and especially for everybody, it's so easy to just, grab Logic or GarageBand and start creating. But remember that in order to finish something and in order to grow, you need that feedback. And sometimes it's not only feedback from, people that are hearing the music you put out, if you do put stuff out, but people that have a sonic and production approach, right? Even if it's something as simple as, hey, send your track to another friend, your session to another friend that is also making music, and see if they hear anything or have any suggestions. And they might be like, hey, dude, this is great, but your vocals aren't high pass, so there's like a ton of like low end rumble and 60 cycle hum on them. So I just filtered all that out, and I think it really cleared up some of that that noise, and I cleaned this up and this up that maybe you didn't hear, or I like to do this and this, and that's how you kind of get this sense of community and learn from other people that have been doing one certain part of the process, maybe more so, than you do, and have an even more refined eye. So I think that's awesome. And I think that's probably, we got to the mix. I love the song. And everybody should 100% go check it out, go support. And whenever live music comes back, boy, oh boy, I can't wait to hopefully see some videos and see the song live. And I just have to say thank you again for sharing this and giving me a peek into this world. And whoever finds this video in the future, hopefully it's been helpful. And if it has, obviously, for myself, you can either follow me or the studio, True Level Studio, on Instagram, or truelevelstudio.com. Also, like I said, by this point, hopefully we will at least have one, if not multiple episodes out of our new podcast, The Record Process, which we'll be doing a lot more. And where everybody else on your end, when's the record coming out, and what else should I and or we know?
So it's coming out on April 9th. The album's called A Glorious Ruction. Before I came in here, I was like, right, I'll bring a copy of the record in with me. Same thing I said when I was doing an interview yesterday, and of course I left the fucking thing in the room the other side. But you can buy the record from annasanker.bandcamp.com. It's out April 9th. There's less than 100 copies left at this stage, so it would be great to clear them out of my room. We printed them on, or we pressed them on recycled vinyl as well, which was a cool thing. So all the cut-offs of other people's records has gone into making ours. So each one is a unique color, and it's coming out through a local Limerick label.
So cool.
It is sick, yeah, and it's coming out through a local Limerick label called Out on a Limb Records, who Mike, who mixed the records, involved with it, and some members of Windings, who are a Limerick band. So if anyone's on your end of the Atlantic is listening to this, definitely check out the bands on Out on the Limb Records, because they're so fucking sick, and it's a real honor. It's a real kick for me, because that label and all those bands, while it's still it's a small independent Limerick thing, it actually means a lot to me, and it is like a real honor to have something out, and it's a real honor to be able to chat with you about something like this. Like, I feel really grateful for you to ask me, and the Wonder Years have been a huge inspiration to me, and to be able to see how you operate as a band, certainly, and like to get to tour with you as well, certainly kind of influenced a lot of things. And then with the studio as well, it is, I do feel like what you're doing with True Level is, you're going slightly different to most studios, and you're doing lots of coaching, and that's something with my own work and my own teaching is very important to me. So thank you, Casey.
You're the sweetest. Listen, give my best to everybody over there, and best of luck with the record. And you can definitely sign me up. I'm going to go grab one of those immediately, because that's so cool. I've got to get my hands on one of the recycled vinyl records. It's amazing. Keep it up. Don't stop doing what you're doing. And hopefully we'll chat soon.
Sick. Thank you, Casey. All the best.
Yeah.